All right, we've been at this for weeks now, and I'm excited to give you the last 12 ideas for the 34 cards using just one paper pack. Don't forget, if you need exact measurements, full instructions, completed card photos, and cutting guides, then you can check out the ebook in the video description below, and Justine Hovey VIP members get that for free. All right, let's dive into those last ideas, and I'm so excited to show you how to finally use up the rest of your scraps. Our next card is another simple one, and this is a card that you don't have to finish simply, but the original construction of it is quite simple. This cardstock, or this particular pattern paper, came with a sheet that had a bunch of single squares kind of together and rectangles. You can see here that these were all just one piece in general. It's up to you whether or not you want to do it this way and how you arrange these squares, but if your pattern paper doesn't come with something like this, just cutting your own patterned paper squares will work as well, and if they have single elements like these single butterflies, that will work too. It took me a bit of fiddling to get something that I liked, but I decided to back my cardstock here up with some of that black text paper, and then I was able to grab another square that I had cut out of this butterfly and back that also with the black text pattern paper. Sorry, I'm a bit off screen there, but I think you get the picture. You'll notice that I don't really do a ton of measuring. I just kind of cut and go with the flow. Because really every pattern paper is going to be kind of different in this sense, and whether or not it's going to work out to cut out single elements like this is hard to say, but just kind of backing them with some black cardstock or whether some black pattern paper comes with it, you can create this really beautiful squared kind of card, and you can add your sentiments and embellishments as you see fit. After kind of having fun with paper piecing things together here, I grabbed a whole bunch of just single squares and just started to kind of put them together and see what I liked, whether it was kind of having these sort of off-centered squares and which ones had sentiments already stamped on them. It just kind of depended, but having a nice little squared card here with different pattern papers works really nicely as well. Eventually, I did decide on just centering all of these here on the cardstock. I just thought that that would be a lot easier. Doing 2 squares on the top, a rectangle in the center, and then 2 squares on the bottom. So that card, again, super quick and easy, using some squares and rectangles to make a nice little collage. Now my last card is probably the card I should have started off with right in the beginning, and that is adding a simple cardstock panel to the front and not adding any vellum on top or anything like I did in the first piece. And this is just one of those beautiful pieces that will work where all you need to add is a sentiment and the card speaks for itself. So certain pattern papers are just going to be absolutely stunning and gorgeous on their own. All right, so the next card uses another type of die that is meant to be for like cards that open up in the center, but I grabbed this die. You could also get a look like this by partially die cutting a butterfly and then just cutting up and down towards the butterfly. You don't need this particular type of die to make this card. And so all you're going to do is just remove this, and what it's done is it's cut the front of your card base into a butterfly flap. And you can just poke out all the little pieces here and it's all ready to go. And this creates almost like a note card type of paper. So what I'm going to do here is just add a piece of pattern paper to the background, and it makes just such a beautiful card. And whether or not you want to have just the flap open up or you want to glue the flap right on top and then glue it to a card base, that's completely up to you. But something like this is a really simple way to use just a large piece of pattern paper and then just have it stand out with that pop of color. Up next, another really easy one where it's just some paper and some glue. You're going to grab some stripes and strips rather, and then you're going to go ahead and just add them to your cardstock. Now, depending on how thick you make them, you may want to make some in a variety of sizes. So originally I had 3 of these pattern paper panels, one on the left, one on the right, and one in the middle, but then I decided that it needed a little extra something. So going in and adding a nice little pop of black here with some really, really tiny 1/8 inch strips really, I think, made the card go from okay to wow. Now this card here is one of my favorites and a really great way to show how you can create 2 pieces, or use 2 pieces of cardstock rather, to create a really versatile card. So what I'm doing is I'm grabbing this high die and I'm placing it on top of 2 pieces of pattern paper and just keeping it attached in place here in the center. Both of these pieces of pattern cardstock are actually not glued together at this moment in time, which is why I am grabbing a piece of tape and just securing it on the left and the right side so everything stays in place as it's traveling through the die cutting machine. There's nothing more disappointing than putting something through your die cutting machine and it shifting. Once it comes out of the die cutting machine, the die should be actually good enough that it will die cut through both pieces. It does put quite a bit of pressure on the die though, because obviously your sandwich is a little thicker than it normally would be. So your double-sided adhesive may be a little bit, or your adhesive here that you use to attach the die might be quite stuck on there. So you got to be careful when you're taking it off. But now I have all these really fun pieces to play with. So this die is very versatile and it cuts out not only the letters for high, it also cuts out a little frame, so that's really nice as well. And both of these pattern papers that I was able to take off are going to be super useful when it comes to creating my card. So I'm going to go ahead and fold my card base, and then I'm going to glue on the first bit of the card here, and that is this high frame. And this is going to be a very colorful card in comparison to the second one, which is going to be nice and clean and simple. So I'm going to go ahead and glue this onto the front of the card. I love this pattern paper because it's very subtle, very neutral, light, like a dusty rose type of color. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab the second frame here. And I'm also going to layer that on top since I cut it slightly smaller than the original panel of the light pink. So I've got a nice border, a white border. I've got a nice border of the light pink. And then I have this frame as well, which is super easy to line up because it should line up exactly with the previous piece of pattern paper. I'm going to go in now and add some foam tape to each of the areas. And then I'm going to go ahead and add in the high letters. And this is going to just give it a nice pop so that it doesn't really just blend into the background. But if you don't have foam tape or something like that, you can just glue it right in the center and create a nice one-layer card. So here is a look at that final card. It's absolutely stunning. I love the way that it turned out, and I think that having the nice white frame around it looks really great in the high as well, because this die is kind of unique where it cuts out the outline of the letters as well. Really great type of die to keep a lookout for your stash because you're not going to get just the letters, but you're also getting the frame, which can be so versatile in itself. Now this is another nice 2-for-1 card, so grabbing some foam tape and attaching these as well, I'm going to add the high onto my card. And then I'm going to place this line shadow here over top and kind of just wiggle it in there. You actually have 2 of these, so you can use that for a third card as well if you wanted to. And this is just going to create, again, a nice frame, and I think the foam is a nice touch because it pops everything up. Adding some sequins onto this makes this an absolutely stunning card. All right, the next card is another one of my favorites that I created, and this is another great one that if you have a lot of just 1/2-inch strips laying around, that you can make this with any card. Again, kind of going for a quilted sort of look, and going for a very busy background here that will tone down at some point, with a huge sentiment, or you can tone it down by adding some vellum over top or a white rectangle or something like that. It's too much on its own, but I do love the way that it turned out. So I'm just randomly adding strips here. So I added one down, and then right at the edge of that, I'm going to put one to make a 90-degree angle. So just kind of like a corner. And then I'm just going to fill in the rest of that corner. So it's kind of like the corner of a square or a triangle. And then I'm just going to add a variety of pieces of pattern paper going all the way up. Now this is similar to the quilt card that we created earlier with the 1x1 squares in part 1, because I'm going to trim the edges of this and I can use a lot of those strips to continue making this card, which is again super great and also provides a lot less waste. So I'm making sure I'm going in and I'm just putting these on from top to bottom, side to side, and just adding a variety of lengths here and just playing along with it. I mean, the key is just to make sure that the row of pattern paper that you're doing is all the same length. Other than that, there's not really much importance to anything, and you can change the direction at any time. I'm not going to complete the card just yet. I'm going to go ahead and trim this so I can use some of those leftovers to continue making the card. All right, continuing on now to fill in the rest of those triangles there. All I need are for some really quite tiny pieces, and then it's all going to be finished. So love the way that this looks. I think it looks fantastic and really, really versatile and great technique. And it's so much fun to see all of those pattern papers playing so nicely together. And if you have any of those half strips kind of left over, you'll also have some that kind of have a fishtail banner because they were placed in corners, let's say. We're going to use those on a separate card as well. And I'm going to create a couple cards here that are just very, very simple cards of adding 1/2-inch strips from top to bottom, kind of coming down like a little bit of a waterfall. What's going to make this card really pretty is just adding a variety of lengths and then also adding a couple of those pieces maybe that have the diagonal corner on them. It'll be kind of a little bit unexpected. We're going to use those on a card for sure. But again, just varying up the lengths from small to short. You could also create these in a pattern from longest to shortest, shortest to smallest, whatever you like. They're just going to create such great cards. Again, so easy to do, whether it's with pattern paper or just solid cardstock. It's just a really easy type of card that you can create with very few supplies and in pretty much no time. Now at this point, throughout creating this with the booklet, I really started to run into really tiny pieces that were left over, and I thought this die would work really well with it. But again, you don't have to do this particular die and have these puzzle pieces. You can grab letter dies, for example, and cut each letter out of a piece of colored cardstock or pattern paper. You can grab any sort of die that's kind of divided in certain areas, whether it's a flower or it's a tree or branches or whatever, and just add each piece a different type of patterned paper. You're gonna have to run this through the die cutting machine several times to get a piece here and there. You can leave a piece that's missing too. If you're pairing it with the right sentiment for that, it's completely up to you. And I really love the way that this kind of turned out. It was kind of like a mishmash and an ability to really just use those leftover pieces that didn't have a home. Of course, I attached it to a piece of foam tape and then attached it to my card, and it's really just ready for any type of sentiment. This would be perfect with the missing piece for something like an I miss you type thing, like you're the missing piece to my life, that kind of style of card, which is so cool. Continuing on with some easy, quick glue together cards. Another play on adding just some simple strips to your card, but again, just adding them in a totally different width. So I'm going to go ahead and add in some of these really big pieces. These were some of my leftover pieces that I had from creating. And again, you can choose whether you leave a little gap in between or whether or not they're all just kind of close together. When I realized I didn't have enough to make the top of the card, because I use liquid glue, I was able to kind of push them into place how I needed them to be. So that's pretty much the end. I mean, I doubled up on one of those 1x1 quilt cards that we created in video number 1, and this was kind of what I had left over. But you know what? I thought this was still a little bit too much. I had a couple of pieces that were pretty big still, and a couple of little strips. So I decided to go back in with that card we just made, and then add in some of these text black pieces here to fill in those gaps that we created. And as I said, back in video 1, I made that quilt card with just 1x1 strips. So I just simply took what I had left over here and made a second one of those cards to finish off my 34 cards with just one paper pack. Very, very little waste here. So let's take a look at the final backgrounds that we made. A nice strip card here, a 1x1 quilted cards. That's the second card I told you about, just in different patterns and colors. Adding some vellum, adding the strips here in different directions, beautiful horizontal strips, the pop of color, going in and creating some random strips, and then creating some with holographic paper, the cover sentiment die with the birthday, the cover dies here where you added the alternative into the frames. Same idea with this card, just using white cardstock, adding some textured embossing paste, creating 3 cards out of a cover plate die, another strip die that I just created, the pop of color in the corner, the frame, the stripe in the middle, the squared card, some squares, some plain pattern paper simply on a card, and then continuing with the final cards that we made in today's video. I hope you enjoyed this. It was so much fun. Thanks so much for joining me on this amazing journey creating 34 cards with one paper pack. This was no easy feat in creating this whole little mini course here on YouTube, but it was so much fun to pass along the knowledge, and I'm so thankful for all the positive comments that I've been getting. I hope you'll join me in the future for more videos. I come out with videos every other Monday, and I'm so excited to continue to get crafty with you. Bye for now.